All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to demystify a really powerful research approach, one that's all about getting the complete story. It's called mixed methods, and honestly, it's changing how we get a handle on some of the world's most complicated problems. So let's get into it.
So let's start with a really basic question. When you're trying to figure something out, how do you do it? Do you lean towards counting the data points, getting the hard numbers that show you the scale of something? Or do you zoom way in and listen to the stories, the personal experiences that give you the real depth? This is the classic tension, right? It's at the very heart of how we try to understand things.
For the longest time, research has pretty much been split down the middle into two big camps. On one side, you've got quantitative research. I like to think of this as the satellite view. It tells you what is happening, and on a massive scale. It's all about statistics, being objective, and finding patterns that you can apply to a whole population. Then, on the other side, you've got qualitative research. This is your street-level view. It's all about the why. It's where you find the depth, the context, and the rich subjective stories behind those big numbers.
And look, one isn't inherently better than the other, but qualitative data has this unique power. Robert Weiss captured it perfectly back in 1968. He said it's superior in its density of information, its vividness, and its clarity of meaning. That's the kind of deep understanding you just can't pull from a spreadsheet. It's the difference between knowing a fact and really getting what it felt like.
Okay, so here's the problem. When we decide to rely on just one of these methods, just the numbers or just the stories, we are only ever seeing part of the picture. And sometimes that half picture can be pretty misleading. Let's start with what happens when you have just the numbers. So imagine a survey shows that stress levels at a company are really high. Okay, that's a super important what. But it tells you absolutely nothing about the why. What does that stress actually mean to people every day? Is it burnout from long hours? Is it a difficult manager, a lack of support? The numbers alone just can't go there. They can end up oversimplifying the very human realities they're meant to describe.
All right, now let's flip that around. What if you only have the stories? You might have this incredibly moving, powerful interview with one employee about their stress. It's compelling for sure. But you have to ask, how widespread is this? Is this one person's story the tip of the iceberg, or is it an outlier, an anecdote? When you're working with just a few people, it's almost impossible to know if what you're hearing applies to the whole group.
So you can see the issue, right? Ultimately, either method, when it's used all by itself, leaves huge blind spots. The satellite view can't see the details on the street, and the street-level view has no idea what the whole city looks like.
And this is exactly why we need a third way forward. We need an approach that can bridge that gap and really give us the best of both of these worlds.
And that solution is mixed methods research. At its core, it's a beautifully intuitive idea. It's research where you intentionally, purposefully combine both the quantitative and the qualitative. And the goal is simple. You want the breadth you get from the numbers and the depth you get from the stories. And you use each one to check, strengthen, and corroborate the other.
Now, here's a really key point. This is not just about using a couple of extra tools. It's a fundamental shift in philosophy. For decades, researchers were kind of stuck in these paradigm wars, arguing over which method was the right one. Mixed methods comes along and basically says, why are we fighting? Why do we have to choose?
The philosophy that drives all of this is called pragmatism, and its core idea is so simple and powerful. The research question is king. A pragmatist doesn't start with a favorite method. They start with the question, and then they ask, what is the absolute best way to answer this? And then they use whatever tools are needed to get the job done. Numbers, stories, or, most powerfully, both. It completely rejects that forced choice.
Okay, so that's the why. We got it. But what does this actually look like in the real world? Let's get into the how. We're going to walk through 3 core designs that show you exactly how researchers put mixed methods into action.
First up, we've got a design called the explanatory sequential. The name itself gives you a huge clue about what it's for. Its main job is to explain something surprising or puzzling that you found. The flow here is really straightforward. You start with the big picture. That's the quant, the quantitative part. You run a big survey and you find an interesting trend or a result that makes you go, huh, what's going on there? Then you follow up with the qual, the qualitative part. You do targeted interviews to dig deep into that specific finding and really understand the why behind it.
A fantastic real-world example of this comes from a study of community health workers in Pakistan. A big quantitative survey, the Quant part, found that about a quarter of them were dealing with significant stress. That's the what. But why? That's where the qualitative part came in. Through follow-up focus groups, the researchers found the specific causes, things like not having consistent medical supplies, not being paid enough, and not having a clear path for their career. The stories brought the statistic to life.
Okay, our second design basically flips that whole script. This is the exploratory sequential design. And you use this one when you don't even know enough about a topic to measure it properly yet. You have to explore it first.
So here the flow is reversed. Qual comes before Quant. You start by going deep with qualitative exploration, interviews, observations, to really understand a topic from the ground up. You identify the key themes that actually matter to people, and then you use those rich insights to build a brand new and much better quantitative tool, like a survey, so you can measure it across a much bigger population.
A perfect example of this is how the client violence questionnaire was created. To build a survey to measure violence against social workers, researchers first had to ask, what does client violence even mean to the social workers who experience it? So the first phase was all qualitative interviews to understand how they defined it. Only after that could they build a quantitative questionnaire that was actually grounded in reality and could accurately measure the problem.
Our third and final design is the convergent design. This one isn't sequential at all. It's about bringing everything together at the exact same time to get the most complete 360-degree view you possibly can. With the convergent design, you're basically running two research projects in parallel. While a huge quantitative survey is out in the field getting numbers, a qualitative team is simultaneously conducting deep, in-depth interviews. You analyze the two sets of data separately at first, and then you bring them together. You merge them to see if they tell the same story or if they maybe offer different complementary angles on the same problem.
The magic word here is convergence. As researcher Todd Jennings found, when your different methods all point to the same thing, when they produce largely consistent and convergent results, your conclusions become dramatically stronger. It's like having two totally independent witnesses confirm the same story. It just builds an incredibly strong case.
So we've gone through the what, the why, and the how. Let's wrap this all up with the big payoff. Why should we really care about mixing methods? What's the ultimate advantage here?
So what's the real payoff? Well, it boils down to 4 huge advantages. First, triangulation. That's just a fancy term for corroborating your findings to make them way more valid. Second, complementarity, letting the numbers and the narratives each tell a different part of the story to create a much fuller picture. Third, development, using the insights from one method to literally build a better version of the other. And finally, expansion. You can just expand the scope of your research and start asking bigger and better questions.
And really, that brings us to the final thought. The challenges we're all facing today, whether it's in public health or social justice or technology, they are incredibly complex. They have a massive statistical scale, but they also have a deeply personal human dimension. So the real question we have to leave with is this. In a world full of messy, complicated problems, can we truly afford to tackle them while only seeing half the picture? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.